How have you found the GAP Summit so far? What have you enjoyed most from being here?
I think it's been tremendously stimulating to meet both leaders in the field of biotechnology from the private sector, associated with government, from foundations and other organizations, and to meet students who are tomorrow's leaders, and to listen to their questions, listen to their perspectives, and have that tremendous learning opportunity.
And why do you think it's important for leaders like yourself to meet with the leaders of tomorrow, to engage with them?
Well, I think the problems the world faces today are far too complex, too interlinked to be solved by any one sector, the scientific sector, the non-profit sector, or governments. What we need is much greater cooperation, much greater inter-community learning. So I think for us at the United Nations, it's tremendously important to listen and learn from those who are at the cutting edge of science. And I would argue that perhaps also for them, it's important to learn from the United Nations, who have an unprecedented, unparalleled outreach to the problems across the globe that the world is still grappling with.
And across the UN Sustainable Development Goals, where do you see the biotech sector as having the most promise, the most practical promise in helping to achieve those?
Well, I think all the Sustainable Development Goals are critically important. Perhaps if one had to single one out that I think is negatively affecting the pursuit of all others and negatively affecting peace and the possibilities of sustainable development, it's inequality. And I think science, biotechnology can either be a contributor to deepening inequalities that already exist within societies, or conversely can be a major contributor to reducing inequality and overcoming that blight. So I think that's a particular area where biotechnology, be it in access to medicine, access to food, access to safe drinking water, for those who otherwise are forgotten and left behind, biotechnology can play an absolutely critical role.
And there are these inequalities within countries and across countries. When these 100 young leaders go back to their countries, what can they do within their countries to try and address those inequalities through their backgrounds in biotechnology?
Well, I think a lot is linked to the research and product development that they're involved in. And a lot is also linked to the sort of where organizations they may associate themselves. Our hope would be that the research and product development efforts of young scientists, of big corporations, are more and more focused at not necessarily exclusively on profit, but on finding solutions to solve the problems of those who are most forgotten. And one would hope that the gifted scientists of today will be drawn more and more to solving those big questions of our times, rather than necessarily being engaged in the science that may be linked to the greatest profit, but might actually be exacerbating differences across the globe.
And those inequalities across countries, I mean, you've mentioned a bit, the lack of institutions or resistance from institutions can potentially be a barrier to implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I guess similar themes have come across from some of the biotech companies today as well. So what do you think from your career would be lessons for the biotech industry around working in these areas of institutional voids?
Well, I think, it's something that's well understood, I think, in many developed countries, is that for science to progress, sharing knowledge is fundamental. Those institutions that build multiple ivory towers for its intellectuals to huddle away in in closed doors, behind closed doors, not sharing knowledge, are seldom institutions that thrive. So I think it's more and more understood that sharing knowledge within institutions, across institutions, is critical to making further progress. I think that model has to be taken and seen globally, and I think there's a major role to be played for the gifted scientists, wherever they be in the world, for reaching out to communities that do not have the same capacity, and to building capacities, to sharing their knowledge. And I think ultimately all will benefit from that.
And if you had one piece of advice for the 100 leaders of tomorrow who are here today, what would that one crucial piece of advice be?
I would say that don't forget that your gift, the very fact that you can come here, means that you belong to a very privileged part of humanity, and that privilege carries certain obligations with it, and that's to do one's utmost to help those who otherwise would be left behind. And that's not only a duty, but it's also probably what will make your work most fulfilling and most worthwhile.
Thank you very much.